The Heat are basically running it back with this roster, but could the path to success be changing roles for key players? We answer that on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat, whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day, Monday to Friday. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members, and today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We're looking at the players whose roles will or could change next season. We'll get to Tyler Hero, Terry Rozier, some of the role guys in a moment, but let's start with Bam Adebayo, who has already seen his role change playing for Team USA. I think the Olympics could set the stage for Bam to play a lot more power forward this season, if only because Erik Spoelstra, who is on the Team USA staff, is getting a front row, first-hand look at Bam playing next to Anthony Davis for most of his minutes. But I got to imagine if you're Spo and you're watching that, and maybe I'm biased, but I think the second unit for Team USA is much more interesting than the first unit outside of LeBron James doing what he's doing. How do you not watch that and say, yeah, we definitely need to experiment with this a little bit more?
I wonder how that kind of played out, obviously the decision to start Embiid, it's been a little questionable. Like he has been a little clunky in that starting rotation. He just doesn't move as well. He's clearly injured, limited to some regard. His style of play just doesn't lend itself as well to FIBA style basketball. The ball movement has been a little up and down, if pretty much non-existent, to be honest with you. And then you look at Bam playing so effectively, and yes, he's playing alongside Anthony Davis. So that's a huge step right there. We have to acknowledge that the role is easier for Bam to slide down and be less of a center when you've got AD out there sharing the floor for most of his minutes. So that and
floor spacers like Jason Tatum and Tyrese Halliburton and all these guys playing around you. Yeah. So definitely a good note. Yes. Yeah, a little bit.
But I wonder how the conversation took place. We've been hearing these grumblings for a while. UD was very public in saying that Bam needed to slide to the 4. Then Bam went out and said that he needed to play more at the 4, that he'd like to preserve his career. It's all about longevity at this point, being able to be as effective as possible once the postseason rolls around. So we've been hearing a lot of this. And of course, we saw his role as a floor spacer kind of start to burgeon a little bit at the end of the last season in particular. So this has just been a very slow evolution taking place over the last, 5-6 months or so. And here we are, start of the season, 2-3 months away. And it's, I think, a likely possibility. It's definitely something you have to consider. I think Erik Spoelstra, to your point, he can't just be there watching all this, hearing all this noise and everything else and going, no, I don't care. I'm just going to go ahead and put him at the center spot anyway and not consider this. You drafted a 7-footer in Khalil Ware. You've got Thomas Bryant re-signed. You've brought Kevin Love back. All of that kind of spells. We've got a bunch of options at center. We can't afford to play Bam a little bit smaller at some point in the rotation.
It spells that the Heat are trying to at least get there, right? And
fair enough.
It's one thing to say, all right, we're going to start Khalil Ware to begin the season in the opening lineup, right? And I don't know if we're going to get there or not. Khalil Ware's a rookie. There's a lot of guys who deserve maybe being that starting 5. We'll talk about that a little bit more as the show goes on, I'm sure. But starting lineup, closing lineup, middle of the game lineup, only in third quarters when it's a blue moon, I don't know. But we're going to see it sometimes, Bam playing at power forward next to another center. And Erik Spoelstra has been trying to do this. He has been trying to get to this. We saw an opening night last year. He went with Bam and Kevin Love in the starting lineup. He ultimately couldn't do that anymore because Kevin Love just can't hold up defensively, and it was just not viable on the defensive end. We saw him do that the year previous when they got Kevin Love on the buyout market. He just started Kevin Love right away. Erik Spoelstra has wanted so badly to play another big man who could space the floor next to Bam for years, and yet the team has cycled through guys who just couldn't really do it. Can Ware be the answer to that? Is the question. Can Thomas Bryant even with another year of season. This is a guy who has played a lot of NBA games. It was an underwhelming first year in Miami, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it won't be a good second year. He's got the talent. He's got the size. Like, theoretically, on paper, there's the things that you want are there. I look back to the 2019-20 season when Bam played 57% of his minutes at power forward. Basketball Reference keeps like a tracking of it. It's not exact. It's not perfect, but you and I watched the 2019-20 season. Sounds about right. Half his time sort of guarding power forwards, guarding centers. That was the team with Myers Leonard and Kelly Olynyk on it. Those guys, legitimate 7-foot floor spacers. There's nobody on this roster who is Kelly Olynyk or Myers Leonard from a three-point shooting perspective. But if Bam is starting to incorporate the three-point shot a little bit more, maybe you don't need like 100% Kelly Olynyk floor spacer, but maybe you just need 70 or 80% of what Kelly Olynyk was. And maybe that's Kel'el Ware, maybe that's Thomas Bryant. I don't know. But Bam, at least just shooting the three, he's not ever going to be a floor spacer. I don't think he's somebody that teams will guard when he doesn't have the ball, which is the definition of the floor spacer. But he can, if he's just at least making the open ones, that it is helpful to the Miami's offense. But Spo has tried to do this before. He's done it before. And I do think that with what we've seen with Kel'el Ware, and at least theoretically, he's got the kind of look and feel of the kind of player you would need to put next to Bam.
I mean, to that point about how Bam is viewed as a floor spacer, like, I mean, you look at what Myers did, what Kelly Olynyk continues to do, you know, what Thomas Bryant could do, Brook Lopez, guys of that ilk, you know, they have open looks. I mean, they're left open generally for a reason. As good a shooter as Lopez is, most of his looks are pretty uncontested. Yeah. Bam can still be dangerous as long as he's knocking those down and taking them. The days of holding the ball at 19, 20 feet at the top of the circle and kind of trying to initiate an offense or maybe run his pick and roll or maybe a dribble handoff or something like that, like those days have to be over for Bam. It's like, you know what, if you're that open, you might as well take 2 steps back and let it launch for 23 out, because you've got to be able to at least create the illusion that that's part of your repertoire. Right. And part of that is upping those increases whenever those looks come, and they will come. Like, we've seen that. It's just a matter of being no hesitation. Let it fly. What's the worst that can happen? It's not the worst shot in Miami's diet. Like, we've seen plenty of times where they've milked the clock to a second or two left just to put up a contested jumper in the middle of the paint. Like, what's the point of that? If you're going to be able to at least get a shot off within the first 5 seconds of a shot clock, I understand you want to look to generate the best offense possible, but if you've got the open look and they're letting you have it, let it fly.
Well, it's right. It's that thing. It's the difference between running your dribble handoff, running your triggers, and it's Duncan Robinson coming off that screen and getting into that dribble handoff. But if your opponent snuffs it out and now your offense grinds to a halt or grinds to something very slow, which we've seen happen time and time again. It felt like the entire season was that for the Heat last year. A
couple of seasons, yeah.
Was there a good play all season for the Heat offensively? Like, was there one that just went to plan? But that's the difference, right? Do your first look, get to your first trigger. But if you're 7-8 seconds into the shot clock and that first action didn't result in anything, and instead of just, like you said, instead of just standing there with your butt out looking to set a screen, trying to dribble handoff to some other guy, just take the shot and move it along. But, you know, the other thing about playing Bam next to another big is if he's out there taking the shot, presumably somebody else that's big is inside ready to get that offensive rebound. And that's been the issue with not playing Bam with another big man in the years past, is that he would have to be kind of the only guy setting screens, the only guy crashing the boards with size and all those things. So there's a lot of benefits to playing Bam with another forward, but with another big man. But the base, like the key to all of that working is that big man being ready to play heavy minutes. And we just don't know if the Heat have that player, even if what we saw from Ware in Summer League was that impressive. In terms of Bam, when we go back to just the role change, him being a three-point shooter at center, power forward, point guard, whatever, him being a floor spacer, it ain't gonna happen. And when I say that, it means, like, how, to your point, Brook Lopez, one of the best three-point shooting big men in the league, he's not really a floor spacer in the sense that when he doesn't have the ball, you have a guy guarding him. Right? Teams are just going to close out on him when he gets the ball. That's what's going to happen. He's going to make a lot of looks, and it's helpful to the offense. But it's not necessarily, it's helpful in the offense in the way that three-point shots are worth more than twos and that they're efficient, right? So Miami needs efficient offense, but Bam, like, I don't know how many centers in the league are actually like guys who are like Duncan Robinson, who demand your attention off the ball. Karl Anthony Towns might be the only one, right? Like Kelly Olynyk and even Myers Leonard weren't like respected off the ball. Guys weren't sticking to them 30 feet away from the basket the way that they are with guys like Steph and Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero and all these kinds of guys. So, but that's not really the point. Is my point is, if Bam's entire shot diet is that free throw line jumper, that's just not efficient offense. And Miami's offense has been bottom 10 efficiency the last 2 years. Trading some of those out for open three-pointers is just going to move the offense into a more efficient direction. And that's what I would like to kind of drive home in terms of why Bam needs to take threes. They're just better shots. They create more efficient offense. He can make them. He has the touch. As long as he's taking and making the open ones, we're winning.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, like, we were talking about Embiid earlier, and like he's not exactly a knockdown shooter either, but he's still, you know, those shots are available to him. Sometimes he camps out beyond that perimeter and he knocks those down. But I was just thinking, like, you know, Brook Lopez and his evolution as a shooter now with Milwaukee, obviously playing alongside Giannis Antetokounmpo, like he gets a lot of corner looks. Giannis puts the ball down, drives to the hoop. Could you see similar actions with maybe Nico, where you kind of have Bam flare out maybe to the corner a little bit, and then have Nico operating from the top of the key where he winds up putting the ball down, trying to get to the hoop. Maybe he can command a double team or draw somebody off the baseline and then kind of spray the ball out to a waiting Bam Adebayo at the corner, either Bam or somebody else as a shooter at the corner. Like, I'd like to see more of that with Nico's playmaking. And I think you can, like, he's a good enough playmaker where you can use him as the offensive hub the way Bam has been used in the past. And that kind of allows Bam to just kind of have those open looks in the corner.
It's like a better version of what the Heat imagined with Chris Bosh and Josh McRoberts, isn't it?
Oh my!
Why is that the first thing I thought of?
I don't know. I don't know. But you're right. But it was like Josh was supposed to be.
Right. Well, you don't have to go down that path. He was supposed to be a lot of things. Terry Rozier, Tyler Hero. It feels like one of their roles is going to change. We'll talk about which one after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, the views from your seat feature, and their lowest price guarantee. All that and more. That's why Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets and is the easiest place to get tickets that you might be looking for Major League Baseball, concerts, theater, whatever you might be in town for. Let's say you're traveling somewhere. All of a sudden, a meeting gets out a little early. You got some time in your hands. You check out, you know what? Hey, there's a ball game in town. You go find tickets. You know what? There might still be a little high out of your price range. You wait to the last minute, right after first pitch. And guess what? All of a sudden, those ticket prices drop dramatically. You log into your Game Time account and you save $20 right away when you use the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's how convenient it is. But if you haven't done so already, this is your opportunity, because again, there's so many different ways that they help you save money. It's so convenient. And again, just use the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA, excuse me, and you get $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply, but if you create the account, redeem that code, you get $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Miami Heat talk every day, 5 days a week. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on your podcast app. Moving on with our players whose roles we think could change next year. And I think one of Terry Rozier or Tyler Hero's role is going to change. So the Heat acquired Rozier in January, immediately started, well, he came off the bench the first game, so not immediately, but Eric Spoelstra essentially just went straight to the backcourt of Terry Rozier and Tyler Hero, replacing Kyle Lowry with Terry Rozier. And immediately was asked questions, hey, is this going to work? Defensively, they're both kind of smallish. You know, they're not the strongest guys. Is that going to be able to hold up defensively? Offensively, they both kind of need the ball in their hands. They're both more scoring guards than playmaking guards, like facilitating guards. How's that going to work? And we didn't get a lot of it. We didn't see a ton of it after January, after the acquisition, but I think we did see enough of it where it always felt a little clunky. It was always sort of your turn, my turn, or somebody else's turn with that group. And it's not to say that it can't work, because, again, it's not like they had a ton of time logged. But I don't think that the Heat were sold on it. And I do wonder more than anything, defensively, even beyond a chemistry standpoint, it just feels like they need another defender out there. And I have an idea of who that should be, and we'll get to that here in a second. But in terms of splitting them up, maybe the Heat would be better off bringing one of them off the bench. And I'm sure most people identify that person as being Tyler Hero. Easier to go with Terry Rozier coming off the bench. And if that's the case, I don't know. I think they can go either way with it. But what do you think?
I'm fine with either option. I don't know how it's going to work. I think to the overall premise, you know, we put out potential starting lineups in an episode last week, and that drew a lot of noise from fans, especially online, just because I think the idea is, just start what you might perceive to be your best players. In your proposed starting lineup, you had Haywood Highsmith as a starter, and that was something that I think a lot of fans took umbrage to. And the acquisition of Terry Rozier, again, as a guy who put up a lot of points in Charlotte and has been a capable scorer throughout his NBA career, you would think that would automatically slot him as a starter, but that's not necessarily the case. It's, again, as you said, being alongside Tyler Hero, I don't know that you can afford to start them both. I think it could work. It could work, but I think you're trying to create the best balance possible in all rotations and stagger these players so that all of them can be effective in different ways. But I think when you're looking at which one of the two, either Tyler or Terry, are more competent as a starter, that's a tough question to answer, because I think my preference, just based on style of play, would probably be Terry. But I think you have other guys that are less effective at spacing the floor in Jimmy, potentially Highsmith, Bam, as we talked about. Nico, even to some degree, as good a shooter as he has evolved until last year, I wouldn't call him necessarily a knockdown shooter. So you're kind of lack a lot of floor spacing out there. So my thought is that you would probably need to have Tyler as your starter. And I don't know. It's really difficult to answer, man. I think Terry is a good shooter. He has that potential, but I think, if you compare the two directly, I would say Tyler is the better shooter of the two.
Yeah.
And given his floor spacing ability, I think he's the better option as a starter. I don't know. Stylistically,
he's the better scorer between him and Terry Rozier. And Rozier's a good scorer. I just think Tyler Hero's I wouldn't say overwhelmingly better. I would give him a smidge of an edge in that regard. Terry Rozier's the better passer, facilitator, playmaker guy. I would give him a smidge of an edge over Tyler Hero. But to your point, it's difficult because neither one is just dramatically better than the other one in kind of anything. Terry Rozier, I should take Terry Rozier is better at getting to the rim, would be the only thing. But Tyler Hero, to your point, is, we're talking about Terry Rozier, who is a good three-point shooter, versus Tyler Hero, who is an elite three-point shooter who you are deathly afraid of leaving when he doesn't have the ball in his hands. And that's different than Terry Rozier. So that's why it sort of all comes out even in the wash. And so you were kind of getting to a point, like, stylistically, that almost becomes the key component here. I do have I have a couple of numbers for you, though.
All right.
I just looked them up. Again, small sample size with Rozier, but Bam, Jimmy, and Terry Rozier last year in lineups without Tyler Hero, according to Cleaning the Glass, had a net rating of plus 5.5, outscoring your opponents 5.5 points per 100 possessions. Replace Rozier with Tyler Hero, and then also no Kyle Lowry. So basically kind of sticking to the one guard plus Bam and Jimmy. The Heat were plus 4.1. So that's a pretty decent swing, 5.5 versus 4.1. But the sample was so small that it's still like, okay, we kind of got to see more of it to fully believe in it. But those numbers at least would back up Terry Rozier's case.
The second numbers there are like with Tyler in the lineup. Like, what was the sample size in comparison to Terry? Because I just
twice as big.
Terry didn't play. Okay,
yeah.
So that's what it is, though. I mean, that you would probably have a decrease with Terry if he played more minutes alongside those lineups too. I think eventually it would even out too. That the statistics are one thing, but they don't tell the full story. I think Tyler would probably be the starter. I think both of them would be closers. I think both of them would be in those closing lineups. Why? Because we've seen Tyler hit those big shots, but we've also seen Scary Terry hit those big shots. Like, if that's what we're talking about, I don't care which one of them starts. I don't think either of them should care which one starts. I think they're both going to be closers because they're both capable. They both bring those different aspects. I'd love to see a Terry Rozier drive to the rim as the shot clock expires, kicking it out to a wide open Tyler from the wing and knocking down a game-winning three, or vice versa, because we've seen both options. So I just think there's, again, you have that versatility, but you want to create the most balance possible in your first and second lineup. And I think Tyler is less willing to accept a role as a bench player than Terry is. And I think, again, given the limitations of shooting in the starting lineup, Tyler makes more sense as a starter.
It also kind of depends if we're getting a more engaged Jimmy Butler, because if Jimmy's got the ball in his hands all the time and isn't trying to make somebody else do all the work on offense, then Tyler Hero is forced to be off the ball a little bit more, and he becomes that much more dangerous, and that might neuter a little bit what it is that Terry Rozier is better at than Tyler Hero. And you might want Terry Rozier coming off the bench to lead your second unit when Jimmy Butler's not on the court. So all this stuff is connected. You mentioned the closing lineup. Quick prediction, my closing lineup. I agree with you. I think Tyler and Terry are both in the closing lineup because you need the shot making, presumably at the end of games. I got Bam at center to close games. You stay small, stay versatile. And then Jimmy Butler, obviously. And then I don't know. I kind of have in pencil here Haywood Highsmith because of his defense. But if it's one of those games where you just need offense and you're coming back and you're trying to come back from 10 points, Duncan Robinson can be in there. You just go full offense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. So, I think that makes a lot of sense there.
That said, Tyler Hero changing his role outside, I think you and I agree. Whether it matters whether or not he starts, or if Spo does have to decide between Terry Rozier and Tyler Hero, that matters. But it's not the only thing that matters here, too, when we talk about these players' roles. It's how they play when they're out there, regardless of when they're out there or who they're out there with. I have a really interesting stat that I want to share with you about Tyler Hero. And then we'll wrap up the Tyler Hero part of this conversation. Then we'll get to two more players whose roles can change. One of Miami's first-round picks, could change in a very good way. We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Heat. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. Also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at Locked On Heat. Let us know whose roles you think will change next year. If you have an opinion on Tyler Hero versus Terry Rozier, which I imagine if you're listening to the show, you probably have a strong opinion about that. There's only two kinds of opinions when it comes to Tyler Hero. Strong ones. Well, there's only one. It's just strong ones. It's just a strong opinion.
Strong ones are even stronger ones.
Strong ones are stronger ones, right? You're either in or you're out. Okay, so Tyler Hero, a couple stats here before we move on. Off the ball. This, to me, is the biggest part of Tyler Hero. And I've talked about this before, but if he just looked at Klay Thompson and said, well, that guy is a 5-time All-Star and a Hall of Famer. If I want to be an All-Star one day, my best path might be to take the Klay Thompson path and less of the trying to be Luka Doncic or Trae Young path. And I firmly do believe that, because I think he's that good of a three-point shooter, especially his catch-and-shoot numbers are there with Steph and Klay. And those are the numbers, man. So if he leaned more into that, I think his best games would be ahead of him. So last year, he had 4 games where he scored at least 30 points. He had two of them were to start the season, basically, October 30th and November 1st. The October 30th game, he had 35 points, his season high. Okay, in that game, he had 4 catch-and-shoot attempts. His season average for catch-and-shoot attempts per game, according to Second Spectrum, 4.5 catch-and-shoot attempts per game. In his season high 35-point game, he had 4, so right around his season average. Miami was -3, however, in his minutes, despite him scoring 35 points. In that other game, the November 1st game, he had 30 points. He had just 2 catch-and-shoot attempts. Miami was -1 in Tyler Hero's minutes. So even with him scoring a bunch of points, the Heat lost his minutes when he was out there on the court. So those are 2 of his high-scoring games. The other 2 of his 30-plus point games, April 9th and December 22nd, he had 5 catch-and-shoot attempts, so above his season average, and 7 catch-and-shoot attempts on the April 9th game, so above his season average. The Heat were +15 and +7 in those 2 games where he was scoring a lot of points, still a lot of points, but doing it mostly with catch-and-shoot stuff. That to me is the efficiency balance that we got to get to. He had 4 30-plus games. The Heat lost the minutes in 2 of those games where he was shooting below his season average in catch and shoot attempts, and they won his minutes in the 2 games where he was over the catch and shoot attempt average for the season. That would be what I would present to Tyler Hero, is say, the number for you is the same. If anything, we'll be able to make it easier for you to hit that number more consistently and more often, which would only strengthen your case to potentially be an all-star. But that's why I want you to be more of a catch-and-shoot guy. And I made this point before, but Tyler Hero, to his credit, was embracing some of that catch-and-shoot stuff late last season before the entire offense got injured around him and he was forced to be on the ball more.
I mean, we've been having this conversation for years. The year he was drafted, I remember this was before you went to cover the Warriors for a bit. We talked to a Locked On Wildcats host and talked to him about Tyler Hero and everything else that he had done in Kentucky. And the idea was, and Tyler was pretty consistent in saying this publicly too. He was a guy who played on ball. Like, he wants the ball in his hands. He's going to dribble it up. He's going to create his shot, etc. He's always been that more comfortable. So how do the Heat coaching staff create opportunities? Who's handling the ball? Who's initiating offense to the point where they can kick it out to a wide open Tyler Hero from the perimeter?
So who's the one guy on the team that could say no to Tyler? Who's the one guy on the team who could say, "Give me the ball"?
It's Jimmy Butler.
That's right. And that's why I always like, all this stuff is connected. It's when Jimmy is engaged, Tyler Hero plays more like that, the way that they want him to play. But it's really hard for him to play that way. And maybe that's the case for playing him and Terry Rozier together is, hey, Rozier needs to have the ball in his hands for him to be effective. You got to play off of him, and you guys together could be this dynamic backcourt. And that's, again, it's all related, and it's something that Eric Spoelstra, to your point, is that's his job. He's the one that has to figure it out. But there's no question that that's his better, more effective role. Haywood Highsmith is another guy whose role I think could change next year in 2 ways. I think he's going to play more on the perimeter. He might have to. You look at Miami's front court rotation right now. We know Bam's going to play. Nikola Jovic is going to play. Kel'el Ware is going to play some minutes. I think he's going to play quite a bit, actually. And Kevin Love is probably going to play. I don't know how many. I don't know if it's 8 minutes, 15 minutes. I don't know, but he's probably going to get some minutes. So where does Haywood Highsmith really fit into the front court rotation? It's kind of hard to figure it out, and it's why I kind of have him penciled in as a starting shooting guard. But because he's so versatile and switchable defensively, he can guard all those positions, and that's his value to the team. But I do think he might be more perimeter-oriented, and he's going to play more minutes because he's here, and Caleb Martin's not anymore. And Caleb Martin played 27 minutes per game last year. Haywood played 20 minutes per game. I could see Haywood's minutes bumping up closer to what Caleb's minutes were, and then obviously some of these young guys pick up a few more minutes that were left over. Yeah,
he's going to have to play multiple positions, and I think that'll be offensively where he'll wind up having to do different things. Defensively, he's going to cover everybody because that's just the nature of Miami's scheme. Now, could it be different though if you have Kel'el out there and he's more in drop coverage? How does that change what Highsmith does? Is he switching as much? Is it just basically him locking somebody up and kind of matching up in that regard so that he can, I don't know, create mismatches in that sense because he's such a good perimeter defender? It'll be interesting to see.
I would like to see them switch more. If we have Kel'el in a drop defense and you have Bam out on the perimeter, I mean, the Summer League scheme was Kel'el drops, the other 4 switch. Right. And I don't think that that's not meaningful, right? We know how kind of in sync the Heat and all their development programs are. You have Kel'el drop and you have everybody else switch because Bam can then switch, Jimmy can switch, Highsmith can switch. And the idea, I guess, if my starting lineup ends up being the one where I think, and maybe, or whatever, if you end up starting only one of Tyler or Terry, and maybe you have Duncan out there, whatever, you have one sort of weak point guy, and you and I agree, like all 3 of those guys are good team defenders, even if they're limited as one-on-one defenders, and you have 4 defenders who can help cover that up.
It's going to be interesting. That's your all defensive lineup, right? I mean, you don't have a 5th guy. That's the loss of Caleb, is that you had a potential 5th guy that you could bring out there for defensive-minded possessions, and he was switchable, and he picked up a lot of different players and stuff like that. And it's just now all of a sudden that optionality is gone. I guess could Jaime be that person?
Yeah, maybe Jaime. You could go like super big. I think Terry Rozier, in his Boston days, he was really good. He's got a longer wingspan than these other guys, and he could fight over screens.
That's true.
Which is important, especially if you got somebody in a drop coverage. If he's just providing a little bit of interference, even if he's not blocking shots or stopping the guy from getting to his spot. He just needs to provide a little bit of funnelage is a new word, funnelage to Khalil Ware in the paint, and Bam Adebayo maybe coming weak side. The other guy I have is Nikola Jovic. And this, I don't even know if this technically counts as a role change, but we saw last year he kind of got those spot minutes to start off each half. And it wasn't that they weren't important minutes. The guy did become Miami's starting power forward by the time the playoffs came around. So they weren't important minutes, but they weren't always the most high leverage minutes either. You know what I mean? And so could we see that change, essentially? Was last year just priming for the real leap that Nikola Jovic is going to take? And as much of a leap as last year seemed to be, I'm really interested in watching him in the Olympics for Serbia. He played, by the way, just update. He played. He checked into the game the other day in a friendly for Serbia. He's going to play in these Olympics, which is a great sign for him and for Miami. But could he have more usage? And the thing that I like about him, and again, it was a smaller sample size, but his true shooting percentage last year was better than Bam's, better than Jaime's, better than not better than Jimmy Butler, better than Tyler Hero's, and better than Terry Rozier. And if your goal next year for Miami is we got to make our offense more efficient, we want our offensive rating to be higher, not in the bottom 10 for the third straight year, then tilting more of your offense to Nikola Jovic actually might be a conceivable way to do it. The only question is whether or not it's scalable. Is that true shooting percentage going to scale and stay consistent if you give him more opportunity? That would be the only question with Nico.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see because he's got so many skills. And I know, again, some people kind of brushed back a little bit on the idea of Nico, what his role would be as a starter. And we're talking about Khalil starting, and what does that do with Nico? I guess you could go all big lineup with Nico ostensibly as your point guard or something like that. But
no,
I mean,
I'm so out on Nico as a point guard. I don't understand that. He's not a point guard. The guy's 6'11".
He's a point forward, and he's
he could be a point forward. Can we change?
He's going to have those opportunities.
He could play small forward. He reminds me a lot of Lauri Markkanen, and his stats compared to Lauri Markkanen's are very similar in terms of like the way they where they have the ball, their shooting percentages and stuff like that. Lauri Markkanen's not a point guard. I think Jovic is probably a better playmaker naturally.
Yes,
than Markkanen. Markkanen's a better shooter naturally than Jovic, but to me, I would kind of, because of their size and their sort of overall style of play, I would have them in a similar role. And Markkanen is more of a 3-4 than a 4-5, despite him being 7 feet tall. It's certainly not a point guard. I don't know. Jovic as a point guard makes no sense to me. Also, it doesn't matter because positions don't matter anymore.
Exactly. But with Nico too,
you can't guard point guards is the problem.
Yes. Although we saw him improve as a defender, but I also want him
he's not defending
offensively.
Point guards.
No, I want him finishing around the basket at a higher clip
Yes.
too. Like he's just too big and he's too skilled. His touch is too good. Like either drawing more fouls or finishing around the rim. Because I think if he's going to be getting a bulk of those minutes, and we anticipate that he is, I think he's deserves them. He's certainly more skilled at this point than any other option on the roster. I think he's going to get the bulk of those minutes because he kind of leaned into that last year, and it wasn't just because of injury. He earned that spot, and he's going to continue to earn it moving forward. But he has to be able to finish at the rim and, of course, knock down the three.
So the Heat basically are running it back, save for adding a couple rookies to this roster. So it's going to be imperative on the internal development, on maybe some role changes to make this look, feel, and be different than what it was last year, right? And so I'm glad we did this episode exploring what all these things can look like. Obviously, we'll know more when these guys start working on this kind of stuff in training camp. We'll be there covering training camp, but that's 2 months away. In the meantime, a lot of outlets now are coming out with their offseason grades, and they're not being very kind to the Miami Heat. On tomorrow's episode, we're going to debate whether or not they're right or not to not be very kind to the Heat's front office. But for now, that's it for us today. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube, and follow us on your podcast app.